Welcome to episode 27 of the Rockwell Barbell podcast. This is going to be our second attempt at doing the podcast today. Basically, just to clip note it, what we were trying to talk about was kind of how we originally started hanging out. And, I was asking Dan if, we saw each other at shows and that's how we met, or if it was Rampage State Park. And he had kind of determined that it was Rampage State Park is where we actually started talking at. And we were just talking about how, that place was kind of a pinnacle, uh, you know, um, place on the map for a lot of people to kind of like find their own, it was like their first taste of personal freedom, for better or worse. We were just talking about, hanging out there and what it was like, being a part of that place. And you were kind of talking about the all-nighters at that skate park, I think, before we lost our connection. So if you want to pick back up there.
Yeah. So, last night they had a 35th anniversary party for Rampage. So people came in from out of town, and I was talking to some guys about it, and they were just joking around about how parents would drop off their kids at this grimy warehouse full of ramps that had like a teenager working the front counter, and they would just leave all day. So the noon to 9 on the weekends, or if it was an all nighter, it was I think it was 9 p.m. until 7 in the morning or something like that.
Yeah.
So pretty crazy that we had that place, and the all nighters, kids were just running wild. These teenagers running around town doing scavenger hunts and acquiring different things that didn't belong to them. Like boats and golf carts and maybe even cars at some point.
Newspaper boxes.
Yeah, I mean, just mailboxes. I wouldn't call it stealing because they didn't. I don't know if anybody intended on permanently depriving the owners of that stuff, but it somehow ended up at the skate park.
Yeah.
Some stuff stayed, some stuff went back, but yeah, it was about as punk rock as you can get, with a lot of the people down there not even understanding what punk rock is.
Yeah.
But it was pretty punk rock to do some of the shit that we were doing down there.
Yeah. And, I remember there was a railroad track that was kind of nearby there. And there were several nights where it was like a thing to ramp your car off of that to see, how much airtime you could get or distance. And, I remember like people's suspensions getting blown out.
Yeah. Yeah. Even so, the Honda that you had at one point, like, did you buy it from Coop or did he buy it from you?
No, I bought it from Coop.
Okay, so that Honda was ramped over the tracks while Coop was on the hood. So he was like iron grip holding onto the hood, and had, I think, like Matt Verdugo or somebody drive the car, maybe like Drew York, one of those dudes, drive the car and ramp the tracks while he's like on the hood. I'm pretty sure that's who it was, but that was before you owned the car.
Yeah,
So
I remember
that was a fun time.
I remember there being a dent on the hood that looked like a really odd dent. Like it looked kind of big and sizable, but no
Full
impact.
Full body.
Yeah. I remember right after I got that car, that literally the next day, I took all of the exhaust off of it and welded a straight pipe to it. And I think my neighbors.
And did you spray paint flames on it?
Maybe. So, but I remember that people could hear me coming home. My parents live like on a rural, like kind of back area. And I remember our neighbors could hear me coming home from like probably 3 miles or more away. And then when I got to the actual street, I couldn't hit the gas from when I pulled in on the block because it would wake everyone up. So I just had to come in, 40 miles an hour and coast in my parents' driveway.
Oh, the joys of East Lawn.
Yep. But yeah, that state park, I think everyone, you know, came there to skateboard, BMX, hang out, but at the end of the day, there was a lot of like survival tactics learned there, you know, and it definitely
Yeah.
toughened you up in a lot of ways, Um, and shit, I was looking at videos of that place yesterday after I realized they had their anniversary, and it dawned on me that I was like, man, the walls at Rampage were wood, you know, and then I looked in my gym, and some of the walls are just like plywood, you know. And I looked at some
Yeah.
of the art on the wall, and I'm like, man, the art looks placed similarly to that. And I didn't even realize. Then, also we're in a warehouse. Rampage is in a warehouse. So it just kind
Yeah.
of hit me. I'm like, damn, man, I knew that place is really influential. I just didn't realize how many notes I was taking subconsciously about what a good space looks like for it. That's conducive for hard work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't do that on purpose either, but I saw a lot of
No,
similarities there.
but you go to what you know, and you're like, oh, I've acquired this warehouse, and I'm putting what I like in there, which is weightlifting equipment,
Yep.
and uh, I should probably put some OSB on the walls so that the insulation and the beams aren't exposed.
Yeah.
And then, oh, I don't want to just look at OSB plywood all the time, so I'm gonna do a little bit of artwork. Well, I'm not gonna get like some fancy artwork. I want somebody to customize or draw something on the wall, like
Yep.
either a member or a friend of a friend,
Yep.
something that has like some real flavor. And
Yep.
that was exactly what that place was.
Oh
It
yeah.
was posters and graffiti basically.
Yep. It was like, hey, we need a logo, drawn up. And then what skateboarder do you know who's kind of artsy, who listens to metal, who's going to maybe put a logo together that's based off the original like Slayer branding, or album artwork,
Oh yeah,
like, yeah, no, you bring up a good point. And where Rampage Skate Park was located was just like such a industrial hardcore vibe all on its own, because is that technically the west end of Davenport or?
yeah. That's like as far west end as you can get. That's
Yeah.
in the industrial area of Davenport. And the thing is with that is, it's not really, you're not trying to catch like walk-ins. You're not
Yeah.
trying to catch like people just like perusing through the neighborhood. Like, ooh, this is a cool spot to stop. Uh,
Yeah.
like everybody who goes there knows somebody who previously went there. It was like word of mouth.
Yeah.
People who are looking for a place to skateboard or a place to ride their bike, they're
Yeah.
they're actively looking for that. So you don't need sidewalk shoppers. You don't need window shoppers. Like, the place probably didn't even need a sign on it.
No.
And people would have been down there knocking on the door, trying to get in, you know. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that, to run a business, an active like day to day business in an industrial park
Hmm.
where there's nothing but semi truck drivers and, um, other shops.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's honestly the best way for something like that to exist. You know what I mean? Where it's like the right people will find it and the right people won't find it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine, the fire department trying to do a fire inspection there. And, it kind of went off the radar,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily a spot that's like heavily patrolled by police.
Yep.
It's just, it is what it is, and, it's out of sight, out of mind for those who aren't searching for it.
Yep. And you grew up in that neighborhood, technically, right? Where you lived at, it wasn't very far from there, right? So that was kind of, I mean, not exactly your neighborhood, but it was a hop, skip, and a jump away, right?
Yeah. Maybe like a mile and a half.
Yeah.
I rode my bike there, for the first time when I was 9 years old, and I crossed Highway 61 on my bike to get there.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it wasn't too far, but it was too far for a 9-year-old to be going there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I agree. And how would you describe the neighborhood that you grew up in a couple of sentences? Because I know what it looks like, and for people that you know aren't aware, Dan and I are from the Quad Cities, so we're specifically talking about Davenport, Iowa. But how would you describe that neighborhood in a couple of sentences? Because I know what it looks like, I know what it smells like. You know, I've been there a million times just for work, for hanging out with you, Rampage, whatever. But I just
absolutely.
wanted to get kind of like, your general rundown on what that neighborhood's like, because it's not I feel like it's not a super easy place to live, and it's definitely not like your typical suburban, you know what I mean, like Pleasantville area.
No, no. I mean, I think it's it's kind of it's not quite ghetto, but it's blue collar fabulous if you were to classify it. There's some decent houses down there where maybe some older people who've lived there for a long time to take care of the stuff. And then
Yeah.
there's some seriously run down houses. And you might have a meth house at one end of the block and then some like little old lady at the other end of the block. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of a mix, but mostly blue collar or blue collar adjacent
Yeah.
uh, type of neighborhood. I know, growing up in the 90s down there when I was a kid, uh, gangs were really bad and stuff like that. There were some homicides, a lot of bars. If it
Yeah.
wasn't like a factory or warehouse, there was a bar. You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, it was rough at times, but a lot of life lessons. And if you got out of that neighborhood alive, um, without too many addictions or disabilities, you're probably going to be pretty solid for the rest of your life.
Yeah, for sure. And we kind of mentioned it earlier about how, we met at Rampage, but you also saw me at shows. We also kind of largely got to know each other, well, because of shows, because of, the hardcore scene and everything that comes along with the hardcore scene. And some of the venues that were there when we were coming up were kind of just like Rampage, you know what I mean? Where we didn't realize how good we had it when we had it,
Yeah.
like to me and you back then, we were like, oh yeah, we're just going to like roll down to Peabody's coffee shop and see Bad Luck 13,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like,
That was really interesting because, um, I would see people at the skate park, who were wearing band shirts. I had friends at school in junior high that were wearing band shirts and handing out flyers. I know I saw there was a local band, by the name of Provoke that, there used to be stickers all over Rampage that said Provoke.
hmm
And every once in a while I'd catch a flyer that said that band on it, Provoke. I'm like, well, what is this? I think around 13 or 14, I went down to Peabody's coffee shop to one of these shows, first show ever. And, it's, there's a band from Peoria, Pound for Pound, Provoke is playing, a couple local bands. Um, and immediately I'm like, oh, like they're moshing, but it's not like a push mosh. Like these guys look like they're fighting and we're in like a weird hipster coffee shop, but there's like this super aggressive music playing and these guys dress like me.
yeah,
And so I know some of them from the skate park. So that was always really cool. And the fact that there was a place like that in Davenport, there was Davenport Peabody's and then there was the Chai Cafe, which was like Moline Peabody's.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then there was the Eagle Reception Hall in Rock Island, which was like basically in the middle of it. And it
yeah,
tied it all together. Like the bigger shows kind of happened there.
yeah,
Um, that was definitely really cool because we'd see each other at the skate park, talk to each other a little bit, didn't know we were into the same stuff, and then we turn around and go to a show and see each other at a
yeah,
show and be like, oh, really? Like, you're into this stuff too? Like,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, agreed. And it was one of those things where, like you were saying, we see each other at the skate park, we'd see each other at shows. Then that sort of turned into us street riding together,
Yeah.
and we just started spending a lot of time together across the board, really. And and a lot of the shows that you're talking about from back then um, were just such like a mixed bill at the same time. It wasn't like uniformity was really the goal back then. It was just like, we're going to put a bunch of different bands on there that people might like. And you might not be there to see all the bands, but you're still going to generally watch them, because that's just like
Yeah.
who's on the bill that night. And, I feel like going to shows like that kind of just sets you up to not always be looking to enjoy everything that you experience. Like, I'm not really a ska dude, but I
Yeah.
would stand there and watch ska bands play because I paid $5 to go into the show, right? And so it kind of builds like a tolerance level of shit that you don't love, but you're just dealing with it and it's still fine.
Yeah, and I think there was not an oversaturation of bands that were exactly the same.
Yeah,
Um, you know, in a place like the Quad Cities, you have Davenport, you have Bettendorf, you have Moline, Rock Island, and then East Moline and all the small little, the Carbon Cliff and Silvis and all the small
yeah,
little towns around. You might have, uh, if you had all hardcore bands that were like heavy, like sounding like Hatebreed, you might have 20 people show up to
yeah,
that show. But you add a grindcore band and then another 20 people show up, and you add a ska band to that and then another 20 people show up. So you add these different genre bands to these shows and you have a mixed bag, and everybody doesn't see eye to eye. People are,
yeah,
maybe gonna, you know, look at each other funny, but
yeah,
you're building the scene up, and people who maybe were only introduced to ska, now they heard a heavier band and they're like, well, I kind of like that too.
yeah,
And then we hear a ska band and we're like, oh, that's pretty good. I'll listen to
yeah,
that. That's fun.
yeah,
So it does it. The culture back then, in the scene introduced you to a lot more than what you were seeking.
yeah. That's a
And
good point.
it actually, like, it was survival mode, because really, like, if you only had like a bunch of heavy bands on the bill, you were only going to get 20 people there. You weren't going to
Yeah,
get, so I think for the scene back then, that was absolutely vital, having a bunch of different kinds of bands on the bill,
yeah,
rather than just like, hey, this is a hardcore, like, heavy show.
yeah,
Okay, cool. All your
yeah,
friends are going to show up, but who else?
yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of our BMX riding kind of eventually evolved to like street riding, at sort of the tail end of us living in the Quad Cities, before we moved to Chicago eventually. Um, and it's kind of awesome because a lot of those nights where we were street riding, looking for stairs, looking for handrails to ride or embankments or, the side of someone's business to wall ride on, or
Yeah,
whatever. A lot of things were figured out for us. I feel like, as we were, trying to turn into men, you know what I mean? Trying to get out of those teenage years and get into your 20s and like, and become like a real person essentially. And I definitely think back to, I think that was like one of those nights was like the pinnacle moment of, you basically deciding to become straight edge and to be sober, and, I remember that we had like a very, I don't know if I want to call it like a stern conversation, but it was just like a very real conversation about like, hey, if you're going to do that, if you're going to decide to do that, then make sure it's 100%, like no looking back, and it's crazy just to think like, here we are many, many years later. And, I still don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs. Obviously you're in that same category. And, I don't know. I just wanted to ask you like what really motivated you to want to make that decision as such a young, person, and then stick with it. Because as you know, we're like the rarities for people to decide to do that. It's not the commonality. Back then, it was like a
Yeah.
thousand people that said they were going to do that. Now looking back on it, I'm not mad at anyone, but now looking back on it, like there's only a handful of us that stuck with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting because, when I was a younger kid, I kind of messed around with some stuff, and then I went a long time, a few years as a teenager, not doing anything. And then probably toward the end of when I was 17, I started drinking a decent amount and partying a lot. And I don't necessarily think I had a problem, but I had a lot of personal problems in my life. And drinking was something that everybody did. And, a lot of people did it in the scene, the punk and hardcore scene. A lot of people did it BMX riding and just high school and all that stuff. So, um, I was I was definitely hanging out and partying with a lot of people and drinking, just about every day. I didn't have any responsibilities, so it was fine. But I do remember kind of bringing it up, and we had that conversation,
Mm.
and uh, kind of put the brakes on it for a second. I think that was early April 2004. And then you had gone down to, I think, like Memphis, Tennessee, or somewhere down there, and went to an Embrace Today 420 show. It was like the show was on 420,
Hmm.
and Embrace Today, like a really a hard line straight edge band. They had that song "Fuck You, I'm Edge," like, and you came back from that show with like a rage in your eyes, and you were like, you know what? Fuck everybody. Like, you were pretty, and I was like, you know what? This is the time. This is when I'm gonna do it. And you're like, you better be sure, dude. You better be fucking sure. And I'm like, swear to God, dude. So
Yeah.
yeah. And then I by the end of April, I was totally claiming straight edge. You know, drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak,
Yeah.
or not drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Yeah.
Uh, and here we are, 2024. It's not April yet, but April of 2024 will be 20 years for me.
Yeah.
Uh, have touched a drop of alcohol, haven't touched a recreational drug,
Yeah.
aside from prescriptions, having surgery or a major surgery or something, and
Yeah.
taking a prescription for a few days. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, no drugs or alcohol, still straight edge. Like you said, a lot of people said, "Yeah, I'm straight edge for the rest of my life," and
Yeah.
then within 6 months to a year, if
Yeah.
that, boozing it up, getting OWIs. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And I think that just like you mentioned earlier, I came back from that show or that string of shows that I went to down there in like Tennessee, Kentucky, and all that. And there's definitely like those fleeting moments, where you get influenced by a band or you get influenced by a crazy person who's freaking out about how they feel about a subject, or whatever. But I think when those shows go away and those friends go away, it really boils down to, um, the personal decision that you make. And I think that you and I, and, obviously a fair amount of our friends took it way beyond hardcore. Like in
oh
that
yeah,
sense, we left hardcore behind, thankfully. Obviously, we still have a huge appreciation for it, and we're still, connected to it and everything. But I'm really happy that we didn't rely on music or bands or people at shows to like keep that going for us, because it probably wouldn't have lasted,
yeah,
you know? And now, I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's probably a point of pride that it does have things to do with that, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't have much to do with that. It's just about This is about me. It's about you. It's about our friends. We kind of hold each other to a certain standard, but at the end of the day, it's really about me. It's really about you.
Yeah, 100%. I think in the very beginning, the only people holding you accountable are your friends
Yeah.
and the people that you're around. But when you stop going to those shows, or you pick up responsibilities in life, you get a girlfriend, you get a wife, you get a new job, and you kind of drift away from that stuff. Those people aren't around to hold you accountable anymore. And then that's when you kind of just go, well, I didn't have a problem. I could drink it.
Yeah,
And,
for sure.
they don't care because I'm not around them anymore.
Yeah.
But for me, and I still go to shows. I'm in a band and whatnot, but
Yeah, totally.
uh, nobody in my band is straight edge, and nobody in the scene really. Like, there's a couple guys in the scene, but yeah, for me, it's like it would be harder for me to go get some alcohol. Like, I'd have to go out of my way, you know.
Yeah.
Then it would just be foreign to me. At this point, like,
Yeah.
it's just a decision I made, and like, oh well, I'm just gonna stick to the decision I made. I don't
Yeah.
have
Of course.
have a reason. There's not one reason on earth that I have to want to drink
Yeah.
or smoke weed or whatever. I mean,
Yep.
I don't care when people do. I actually like hanging out with my friends who
Totally.
do that stuff, because if that's what they like to do and
Yeah.
they're not stupid about it, like, do what you enjoy.
Oh
But
yeah.
I don't enjoy it personally, and
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of cool being in that boat, because I don't feel the need to explain to people
Yeah.
why they'll try to buy me a drink, and I'm like, no, I'm good. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't need to be like, no, I'm straight edge. Like, I
Yeah.
don't care. Whatever.
Well, and your confidence and, people sense you being comfortable with your decisions, when you get replies like that. So they may ask like why, just out of curiosity, but
Yeah.
because they sense that you're confident and comfortable in your decision, they're not going to grill you about it because they know that you're already so solidified in your decision making that there's no reason to even go down that path, which is really nice,
Well, and a part of that too is like, if you're not confident in your choice, and you get
Yeah.
defensive,
Yeah.
because you feel like someone's trying to like
Yeah.
offend you. Like, I'm not offended by you trying to buy me a drink. That's a
Yeah.
compliment. It means
For
that,
sure.
you want me to hang, you want me to party, and me saying, "Nah, I'm good."
Yeah.
They're just usually just take it like, "Oh, okay," and then whatever, and then they ask, and
Yeah.
I just say, "I just decided that I don't want to do it," and you know,
Yeah.
I saw a lot of people around me that their lives were spiraling, and alcohol wasn't good for them, and so I decided
Yeah.
not to do it. And they're like, "Oh, cool, I respect that," and then it's not even an issue.
Yeah.
I know when we were, I know in 2004, when somebody offered me something, I'd be like, "No, dude, I'm straight edge." And they'd be like, "What the fuck is that?" And then like try to explain
Yeah.
try to explain Minor Threat to them, and Ian Mackay, and like the culture, and like all the stuff, and they're just like, "You're a nerd, whatever."
Yeah.
And
You give them like a
they
fucking,
just
you give them like a 10-minute dissertation, so I'm really glad that
yeah
we're all past that.
yeah like who cares? Like, honestly, if some kid tried to lecture me on straight edge, I'd tell him to kick rocks.
Yeah, agreed. You mentioned earlier that you're in a band, just so that people know what the band name is so they can check it out. What's the name of your band and how would you describe, what it sounds like?
It's called Concrete Sleep.
Okay.
Uh, it's just like a heavy hardcore band, kind of maybe similar to Hatebreed.
Hmm.
That's probably like the most popular band that I could relate it to.
Yeah.
For the majority of people in the weightlifting community that are going to be listening to this podcast have probably heard Hatebreed or heard of Hatebreed.
Yeah. Or
So
if you
it's
step foot in this gym, you've definitely probably heard
yeah,
that band.
so that's probably the most relatable
Yeah.
you know, it's just real heavy music and not overly complicated.
Yeah, just something you can get pissed to.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you
Uh,
just, if you're a Kyle and you want to punch some drywall, like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
not really. Don't go punch your grandma's drywall.
Yeah. I know that there was a stint when we knew each other early on that you were doing a little bit of fighting, um, mixed martial arts, wise. Was that before we lived together? I think it was, right? That wasn't while we were living together, I don't think.
It actually was when we were living
Oh,
together.
it was. Okay.
So you were, um, I guess I started training when um, you had a dorm room at Ambrose at first.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you're
And
right.
then you had a dorm room at Ambrose, and then we ended up getting that place in Rock Island.
Yep.
And we had like 4 or 5 people living in the house.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I was training during that time.
Real quick,
And
before you move on, the Moline house was before the Rock Island house. Now, did you ever live at the Moline house briefly before the Rock Island one, or was Rock Island first for you?
no, so like we had 2003, 2004, we were uh, riding together a lot, going to shows together a lot. And then 2005, I ended up moving to St. Louis. And when I
Yeah.
lived in St. Louis is when you guys got the Moline house.
Okay, that's when
I
you were
lived
living
there.
down there.
Yeah, I lived there for a little over a year. I moved back to the Quad Cities in 2006, and I think I stayed with my mom for a little bit. And that was when you were in the dorms at Ambrose.
Yeah.
And then whenever you got that place in Rock Island, I moved into the attic, uh, the walk-up attic that was
Yo,
not insulated or anything. That was pretty cool.
yeah, there wasn't active central heat in that attic, right? Or AC, was there?
No, 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 absolutely not. So
Why would there be?
there was no insulation or anything. It was a walk-up attic for storage, and
Yeah.
uh, I had a futon mattress that I
Yeah, yeah.
like laid on the ground, and I hung some like posters and some banners up, and I actually the one light bulb up there, I screwed in one of those like socket
Oh, yeah, that was your
things
outlet,
that
wasn't it?
yeah, that's my outlet. I kept blowing breakers, but uh, it was pretty cool.
Some high class living, man. You got an outlet, and what else you need?
Yeah, I actually had some female visitors in my attic a couple times.
Yo, did you run a space heater off that bitch? Off the outlet?
Yeah,
I
yeah, a
thought
little
so.
bit.
All right.
I
All
think
right.
that I think that's what blew the breaker. Yeah,
I think so.
I probably should have caught on fire at some point.
Yeah. So at one point there was me and another guy living on my floor. You were living in the attic. Um, I think Jake had his own bedroom. So actually there was three of us living on that floor.
Jake had a bedroom. Uh, Jake had a bedroom. Matt had a bedroom,
Yep.
and you had a bedroom, all on the second floor.
Yeah.
And then someone was staying in the basement
Yeah.
at first,
Yep.
and then yeah, and then at one point I think when the attic got too hot because it was okay in
Then
the
you moved into
winter,
the basement.
and
Yeah.
I moved into the basement, and
Yeah. Yeah.
then Amanda also moved into the basement in the
Yeah.
living
Yeah.
room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had like 5 people in the house at once.
Yeah, that was a really wild living situation. Looking back on it, it sounds pretty um, crazy and kind of just like very, very, I don't know how to put it, I guess like low quality, living quarters or whatever. But honestly, back then I thought we had it made. You know what I mean? I was
Rent
so
uh,
happy.
rent and utilities was 125.
Yeah. Per person, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
per
Yeah.
person. Yeah, 125 is
Yep.
like rent, utilities, Wi-Fi, all of
Yep.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, we ended up doing better. But during that time period, I was stoked, man. I thought we had it made. I mean, we were all, living on our own, living with our friends.
There's always
There,
someone to hang out with.
yeah. I mean, it was rad. And probably on another podcast, we can get into that house, because that's probably a whole podcast in
Yeah.
itself.
But
But
yeah, that's when I was training. That's when I was training
yeah,
and fighting,
yeah,
and we were working for your dad at
yep,
that same time.
yeah. And you were fighting in some pretty crazy venues for MMA at that time, because MMA was in that weird period of time where it really hadn't graduated to a lot of organization. I mean, obviously there was some organization, especially at the higher levels,
Yeah.
but in our area, I mean, it was not uncommon for people to go to strip clubs to fight MMA, or to go to biker rallies to fight MMA, you know, uh,
Well, ironically,
you
uh,
know,
started in the strip club.
yeah,
They had one side of the strip club was a fight venue
yep,
with first it started with the ring and then they got a cage and they built like these like wooden bleachers.
yep,
And then the other side of the building was a strip club. So you like walked in to the hallway of the strip club entrance,
hmm,
and they would ask you for your money. Like, no, I'm signing up to fight. So you put your name on a list and they give you a stamp or wristband or whatever it was. And
yeah,
then you had to go up to the DJ and give them your name and info. They would weigh you, and then they'd just be like, "Oh, how much experience you have?" And if you would tell them how much experience you have, and they would try to match make. But the thing is that when you're fighting in a sketchy strip club, and you know, the people that come there all the time know each other, you end up fighting. If you don't know the people, you end up fighting someone with a lot of experience when you don't have much experience. So
yeah,
that was pretty wild. There was no sanctioning, no medical exams, no blood tests, no. You could have been fighting a hobo with AIDS who just wanted to get into the club for free.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that place, man. That was such a blast. I mean, just like,
Well, yeah, the funny thing is you get done fighting, you be a little bit busted up, and then you go over to the strip club for free afterward,
yeah, yeah,
which is kind of similar to that Stars and Stripes place that had like Tough Man. They had a boxing ring. People did wrestling
yeah,
matches and like boxing matches.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. No,
yeah,
that,
you did that once or twice, didn't you? Just messing around, like
yeah,
box with your friends.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
And I
like
remember,
Paul.
oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. Uh, I totally forgot about that. No, I was gonna say the funny thing about that was just like after the fights, we would go next door to the strip club, and just
Oh
like
yeah.
the wildest shit would go down. And it wasn't even necessarily us; it was just the people watching aspect of
There
the
was a
strip club.
stripper there that had one arm.
I remember that, and
She
no one.
she looked pretty good too.
Yeah, she actually did look pretty good, but no one cared. Like it was. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just you'd think it would be something that people would notice. And
Yeah, welcome to Davenport, Iowa.
and then yeah, you also fought at a biker rally, right? If I remember right, I think I went with you to that, or it was
Yeah.
something to do with
Yep.
motorcycles, right?
Yeah, it was a Sabula Iron Horse Bike Fest, and it was funny because they had hot air balloons.
Yeah,
They had like a bunch of hot air balloons, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
you would drive down into like this pit, and there was a huge stage and a
hmm,
huge like area where people like a huge concert area, and then there was a cage like
yeah,
just beyond the concert area,
yeah,
and then they had an old school bus by the stage that I
hmm,
assume is like their green room,
yeah,
and that's where we went into the school bus and weighed in, and yeah, and then fought
yeah, and
outside in this cage at the bike rally.
yeah, and that was just like kind of in the middle of a bunch of cornfields, right? Farmland and stuff like that. It was out in the middle of nowhere a little bit, right? I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah, Savannah, Illinois.
Yeah, Savannah's
Yeah,
awesome. Um,
yeah.
yeah, and then real briefly too, when you were doing, these MMA fights. were you already training a little bit of jujitsu and kickboxing at that point, or did you take these fights on and then started getting into that afterwards? I can't remember really what the real order was of that.
I started training. I trained for like a month before my first fight.
That's what I thought.
Got beat up really bad by this guy who had, I think he was 12-4. He had a lot of fights. Got beat up really bad. Trained for another month and then beat a guy. And
Yeah,
then I just kept training and fighting, training and fighting. And once once they realized it was like halfway decent, they actually fairly matched me up a little bit more.
yeah,
And I was starting to get fights and get paid a little bit here and there. Fought down at that QC Sports Center.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, and then also got in a couple of street fights outside of outside of fighting in the cage, which was interesting too.
That counts for training, right? I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
unsanctioned, another unsanctioned fight.
yeah. So
Jesus, where do you
all
even go with
sober,
that?
all sober too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Speaking of the house situation, so we did live in that Rock Island house for extended period of time. I think at one point the landlord came down from Chicago to like check on the house, and that's where he realized there was like 8 people within his house, and there was a lease for like three. He kind of like lost his shit, came unglued, and that was right around the time where I had already kind of told you guys like, hey, I want to move to Chicago at some point. I'd like you guys to go with me. So after the guy came down and kind of blew a gasket about all that. That was not too long after that. It's kind of when we got out of the Quad Cities, moved to Chicago, and got our apartment here on Kedzie Avenue. Um, and I just told you guys, I'm like, hey, I think I moved here because I had gotten into law school. Like I graduated and I got accepted by Loyola,
Yeah,
and that was the whole reason that I wanted to come
yeah,
here. But really, I just wanted to be in Chicago because I just liked the pace of it. I liked the way it looked. I just had a good feeling about it for some reason. That's my gut told me to go here. And then you, and then our good friend Jake Hartman, also came up here with us. And, Jake and Jake got hired at Crunch Fitness originally because he was already doing sales for Golds in, the Quad Cities. So he was like
mhm,
a no questions hire for Crunch Fitness because it's sort of the same idea, just different demographic, different area.
yeah,
And I remember that I was trying to get, some kind of gig at a law firm as like an assistant or some kind of like internship. I think I went into an interview with like a black eye. That was like the last interview I had, and I didn't get hired, and that was it was kind of the moment for me where I wasn't like defeated, but I kind of realized I'm like, well, maybe you're not really the right fit for this, if like,
yeah,
and I like the law now, but I didn't really like the law back then. So like, this doesn't really check out. So Jake had offered me a potential job at Crunch, and I was frankly broke as shit. Like, uh, especially broke after coming out of college, just surviving on loans and shit. So that's why I took that job. And I think you were looking for work, and
mhm.
you weren't here for very long. I remember I came home one day and you were like, yo, dude, I joined the army, just simple as that,
Yeah,
like straight out the gate. And I was like, hey man, I'm like, you can keep looking for work, like we'll get you a job or whatever, and you're like, no, I thought about it. Like I'm joining the military, dude. Like that's it. End of the story. Right.
yeah,
And, then you can kind of take over from there, but, not too soon after that. I mean, you're in basic, right?
yeah. So you had graduated. We continued to work for your dad for a few months while you kind of sorted through. You were applying for the law schools, and you were going to go to Loyola for environmental law.
Yep.
You
Yep.
had you have a journalism degree from Ambrose, correct?
Yeah, and I was holding
Um,
off my like vegan, vegetarian shit from
yeah,
Earth Crisis and
yeah,
all that.
yeah. So we got the apartment in Chicago. We actually did a lot of trips to Chicago and research and like walked through a lot of places. We had a pretty decent amount of money each saved up, at least to cover
Yep.
first and last month's rent and a
Yep.
little bit in between. Um, I was actively looking for jobs. I moved to the Chicago apartment, I think in December, and I know you were moving, like kind of moving stuff, but you were still helping your dad a lot, so it was kind of
Yeah.
back and forth with
Yep.
that. So I think me and Jake were the first ones to like
You were.
legit move into the apartment.
Yep.
Your room just kind of had stuff in it because
Yep.
you were back and forth. And so I was looking for jobs like probably, November, December, was coming up short left and right. I went on a I went on a trip with some friends from Minneapolis. We drove to Ohio, picked up a couple of buddies, one of them being our friend Tim, who was in the army at the time.
Yep.
And, I ended up talking to him, for hours because we drove to Syracuse, New York for a New Year's show, Path of
Mhm.
Resistance. Um, and yeah, he proceeded to tell me on that trip, about the army and, how he was able to pay for his school, pay for loans and get a bonus. And, he was in Florida and training and doing this, doing that. Kind of sold me on it because I couldn't find a job in Chicago and save my life
Yeah.
for some
Yeah. Yeah.
reason.
It was a rough
I was,
time to find a job when we first moved here. You
yeah,
know,
it's
I mean,
ended
it wasn't
2007,
easy.
beginning of '08. So yeah, I got back from that trip. That was New Year's, and I signed a preliminary contract with the recruiter on, I think, January 12th.
Yeah.
So it was pretty quick. But yeah, I was like, you know what? If I join the army, I can pay my portion of the rent and still have money left over.
Yeah.
And then we'll just find somebody to,
Yeah.
sublet my room to.
Yeah. For sure.
So,
And that was kind of the beginning of you getting into the military, and then eventually you were sent to Iraq, right? Is that correct?
yeah. So I went to basic, I went to my AIT, learned my job, became field artillery, ended up in Fort Blitz, in El Paso, Texas. Um, I actually like fell into a really good hardcore scene there before I deployed, which was really cool. But yeah, deployed to Iraq for a year. I didn't do any artillery. I was a gunner in a Humvee, all that good stuff. Uh, Came back from Iraq, stayed in El Paso for a little bit, and then moved back to the Quad Cities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do
so
you
that's kind of the brief rundown on that. And,
Yeah. What do you feel like was the impact of, being in Iraq and serving over there and being in that portion of the military then? Like how did it impact your life, and what did it do for you as a person, and like what was your kind of overall like, takeaway from all that?
yeah, I mean, I think the military overall kind of rebuilt my mind a little bit. Looking back at who I was, like my character, I essentially learned work ethic from my grandma and your dad, and a couple of really influential people in my life. But there were definitely some things missing,
Hmm.
and I think being in the army really heightened my level of discipline.
Hmm.
And then going over to Iraq and seeing people who literally lived in mud huts. They, you know, and then people who they just wanted to kill you because you don't believe in the same thing that they believe in.
Hmm.
I won't get into the politics of like the
Sure.
reason for the war and all that stuff because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we can go down some rabbit holes,
Of course.
with all that stuff. But yeah, just a little bit of perspective and how fragile life can be,
Hmm.
uh, when you see, possibly the toughest guy you've ever met in your life screaming at the top of his lungs because his arm and his leg are almost gone. You kind of go, oh, all right, well, I guess it's not that big of a deal if somebody talks a little bit of shit to me or says something offensive or does, you know, yeah. stops being straight edge because,
Yeah.
their their life changed and they just don't are in it anymore. Like
Yeah.
I definitely let go of a ton of ego, a ton of hate, a ton of a lot of stuff that I just kind of like held on to because I thought I needed to.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and I don't know if you saw that any sort of difference like that in me
Oh
um,
yeah.
as far as that stuff goes because I had a pretty rigid mindset, which is funny that the army and military overall like released me from a rigid mindset.
Yeah. Oh, I just think it's like the experiences that you have kind of give you, different things to weigh out, compare, and I saw a huge change. I mean, I think I started seeing big changes in you from, you know, let's say the first 2 years we hung out to, by the time we moved to Chicago, I'd already seen changes, a bunch of
Yeah.
positive changes across the board. And then, when you were in Iraq, obviously I wasn't around you that much, but when you got back and I started seeing you and started talking to you, and then just like over the last however many years, I've just seen it compile into this totally new, different, hugely improved person, and um, by no means do I think I'm perfect at all, but, I think I have a good work ethic. I think I have, um, you know, uh, good intentions for everyone in my life that I cross paths with. And I think that, you're on board with that too. And I think you're very responsible, like you look after your kids, you look after your family, you take your job seriously. So yeah, I've seen some huge changes, but I think it's just evolved over time, but I think that was like a pinnacle moment for you was to go do that by yourself too, without having me
No,
next to
yeah,
you.
I didn't have a friend, everything that we did. Well, I guess like I moved to St. Louis, but I moved there and moved with friends,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't move there with friends, but I moved in with friends. And so everything I had ever done was like with with my buddies or people I already knew.
Yep.
I just went and signed up alone
Yeah.
by myself and decided I was just gonna like go on this solo journey
Yeah.
by myself. And it's kind of corny. It's all about the journey, man.
Yeah.
It kind of it was kind of interesting just going and being like, I'm gonna do my own thing here, and
Yeah.
um, it doesn't seem very against the grain to enlist in the service, but coming from our background of
Yeah.
being like rebellious, like, in punk rock and BMX and stuff like that, it was kind of a little bit different,
Oh yeah.
different path for sure.
Oh, definitely. I think it was, definitely kind of an angle that not a lot of people expected. I definitely didn't, I'm glad that you chose that route for sure. But, I was definitely, worried, nervous, scared, uncertain, some of the things that you said to me before you went over there were pretty fucked up, just like, but looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of good that you had that mindset about, not really caring too much, not really worrying too much because it doesn't really do anything for you anyways at the end of the day, Um,
Oh, that's still my philosophy.
yeah, I mean,
Why,
it's not
why
like
worry
that's
about
any,
things you can't change?
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And, the other thing I realized too is that when you moved back to the States, right? Not too soon after that is when you became a firefighter, right? Was that pretty soon after you got back, or was that a year or two?
Yeah, so well, I got back from Iraq in 2010 in El Paso, and I was in El Paso until the end of 2011.
Hmm.
Moved back to the Quad Cities when I got out of active duty, and I started applying for everything.
Yeah,
I applied to the police department, applied to the fire department, applied for all kinds of different jobs. Worked at UPS for a little bit,
yeah,
all kinds of different stuff. Worked for a blind factory, assembling blinds and shades.
yeah,
Just kind of doing a little bit of school here and there,
yeah,
doing random jobs. And the fire department called me because I made their list.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't make the police department's list, but I made the fire department's list. So they give me a call, and I actually hired me in March of 2014.
Gotcha. And I realized that I skipped an important point that I wanted to bring up before we get away from you being in Iraq, is that when you were in Iraq, there was a really cool, I think it was like a day or a night or maybe a weekend. You have to remind me, but I remember that there was essentially a professional BMX tour that came through Iraq,
Yeah,
and you ended up connecting with some of the guys that were on that tour. And at some point, somehow you got a bike in your hands, right? And you ended up riding ramps in Iraq with some of these pros. Like, I just wanted to go over that real quick because that's always forever burned in my memory. And, I feel like that's a very weird thing that most people, they, haven't been in the military, they haven't been to Iraq, much less riding ramps in Iraq with, professional BMXers. It's just a wild, wild story. So I wanted to talk to you about that really briefly.
yeah. So, um, sort of backstory. Riding BMX for most of my youth. By the time I was 18, 19, somewhere in there, I was riding in professional competitions, but like smaller pro comps. So made it into a few magazines by then, before even joining the army, and even a couple of videos and just kind of cool stuff in the niche culture that is BMX.
Hmm.
Getting a magazine or like props video was pretty cool.
Oh
So
yeah.
I had already like kind of been to that level, but not quite, what the common person would know as like an X Games pro level.
Yeah, yeah,
I wasn't anywhere near that, I suppose. Um, but I knew a lot of those guys,
yeah.
and because those guys were also involved in like the smaller competitions and just like being in the Midwest in general.
Yeah.
So about halfway through my deployment in Iraq, a small base with only maybe a couple hundred troops. Um, it's not like a big base. We had tents. We didn't have
Hmm.
like hard structured buildings. Like there was like these bunkers because it used to be one of Saddam's uh, airports.
Hmm.
It was like these concrete hangars that we like built buildings under, and so it was just a weird spot for a BMX tour to show up, because
Yeah.
usually stuff like that like is sponsored by the USO and they go to the big bases, not in danger really. Well,
Yeah.
we were like not necessarily in danger. I mean, everywhere over there was danger, but it
Yeah.
was a smaller base, so there was less protection, right?
Yeah.
So it was a Sunday. I'm walking out of the building. I submitted a work order for the building that we were working out of, because the AC went out, and submitted a work order. I'm walking through this hallway, coming out of this like hangar, and I see a bunch of civilian dudes, and I'm like, "What the hell?" I see this dude's back, like this um, stocky dude with blonde hair, broad shoulders, and it dawns on me that this is a dude that I'm fairly well acquainted with, named Brian Kaczynski. He's actually from Wisconsin, but he's lived in Chicago for a long time. Like he's a Chicago pro BMX rider. He's been in the X Games. He's won medals in the X Games. Like he is a legit pro that lives in Chicago. So I see Brian Kaczynski just from the back. Like I see his hair, his
Yeah.
shoulders, and I know it's him right away. And I just shout out Kaczynski. He turns around on a dime and calls me by my nickname, Evil, my old nickname. Nobody in the army knows me by that. says, "Evil, what are you doing here?" And I look down at the uniform. I'm like, "I'm supposed to be here. What the fuck are you doing here?" And then he just laughs. We give each other a big hug. I see a bunch of other dudes that I've met before. Dude named Catfish. Just like he's just like this tiny little dude from Youngstown, Ohio. That's just goofy as hell. Love him to death.
Yeah.
Uh, and then people that we've seen in videos like Mike Rooftop Escamilla, Dave Osato, like Nate Wessel, dudes that Chad Kagi,
Yeah.
X Games Pro, yeah, like
So
serious,
insane.
some serious heavyweights in the BMX scene
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
show up on my small little base halfway through my deployment. And, uh, yeah, we get out of the hangar and uh, all of a sudden I see Nate Wessel's like got a skill saw and he's cutting transitions out of plywood, and people are bringing him 2x4s and he's starting to build ramp. And I'm shitting my pants
Yeah. Because
because
you know what? It's going down.
I'm like, dude, it's Sunday. There's no mission scheduled. I have nothing on my agenda to do. And I just bumped into like some of my BMX heroes and dudes I actually know that know me, that know that I can ride a bike. And I'm just happy to see them.
Hmm.
I didn't even expect to ride at all. And so, yeah, then I got interviewed by Walter Perringer, who's also another BMX legend, but he was also a photographer.
Hmm.
He interviewed me. Um, went to the demo of the show. They put me on one of their bikes. I rode Dave Osato's bike. I rode Brian Kaczynski's bike. I rode Catfish's bike, which is a little flatland bike. It's really funny for me to ride.
Yeah. Yeah.
6 foot. Um, so yeah, jumped over a Humvee. Was just doing some kind of basic stuff, nothing crazy.
Yeah.
They snapped a few photos, had an interview and a photo in Ride BMX UK magazine that resulted from that. And yeah, that was super rad. That was really
Yeah.
cool. That was kind of like a little mid deployment vacation, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's an unbelievable story, and I don't think I've really heard the thorough version of it. I mean, I think at the time when it happened, you gave me the clip notes essentially.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to hear the ins and outs of that. So when you came back, there was a brief period of time you did some odd jobs. Eventually, the fire department picked you up. Can you kind of give me a rough rundown of what it was like to transition from being in the military and that environment, very very dangerous environment on one hand, and then you kind of transition back into the States and now you're in a, somewhat comfortable environment, but you're also in now like a new danger.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if you could talk about that transition and then also the transition, which is, really, not like the normal route is to like shift into police work.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see if you can kind of talk about those three things and just kind of give me your rundown on like, what was that like? And like, was it difficult when you first got back here, or was it like, was it a really happy thing to be back here, being a firefighter? And then ultimately, like, what in the hell led you into wanting to get out of being a full-time firefighter and become a police officer?
I knew I wanted to do some sort of public service after my military time. I wanted to be back home, uh, but I had thought of getting into law enforcement before I uh, became a firefighter. I was taking some classes and kind of this, I'm like, I like the idea of being a firefighter and doing like fighting fires and doing some like medical, emergency medical services. And I like idea of also being a police officer. So I was kind of undecided on that front.
Yeah.
So that that deciding factor it was chosen for me, being that fire department. I ended up on their list, and I didn't get past the interviews for
Yeah.
police. Um, So yeah, working those odd jobs and just kind of like, grinding a little bit. The pay wasn't great, and it
Yeah.
was all entry level. As a machine, as a gunner in a Humvee, I wasn't really like, I didn't have a ton of transferable skills, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
um, but when I went to the fire department, there was transferable skills, right? Because calm under pressure, not fearful of dangerous situations,
Hmm.
a little bit more mechanically inclined than your average person,
Yeah.
and just, the willingness to serve people, kind of selflessly. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you get paid and you're getting pretty good benefits, but at the same time, you're essentially risking your life to better other people's lives. And so
Yeah.
I felt like I fit in pretty good at the fire department.
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't necessarily like, nobody from my background
Yeah.
was at the fire department. Like, I was very different from a lot of the guys. The only similarity I had with some of the guys is that they had military backgrounds, but like my
Yeah.
upbringing, totally different. Fire department was a lot of like, you know, farm kids, because that's part of that culture. But like people who grow up in small rural towns or volunteer firefighters, and then they try to get hired as a career firefighter.
Yeah.
So you don't end up with like a lot of people who like grew up in the city and moved around a lot and did a bunch of different stuff. Like you get a lot
Yeah.
of farmers and a lot of small towners. So,
Yeah.
but I really did like fire. I mean, I liked fighting fires. I liked, cutting up cars and, being able to pull people out of, wrecked cars, after car accidents. I enjoyed doing, emergency medical care and, improving people's lives.
Yeah.
That was definitely a good time. Uh, there's drawbacks to any job. Um, and part of it was scheduling, having a wife and kids and being at the firehouse for 24 hours. And sometimes, if you got offered overtime, who's going to turn down 24 hours of overtime pay? But then you're gone for 48 hours.
Yeah.
So some scheduling issues and kind of just like, maybe I want to transition to a different job, and, what would that look like? Where would I even go?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I determined like, well, hey, I wanted to do police work before. Like,
Yeah.
this is something that I've always wanted to do. So why not try to do it now? Try to work for the same city so my pension stays the same, my benefits stay the same.
Yeah. That's smart.
And so about 7 years into the firefighting. Hold on a second. Um, sorry, I was getting a call. I had to ignore it.
All good.
About 7 years into the firefighting, uh, I decided to start applying to the police department, and then right around 8 years, I got picked up by the police department.
Gotcha. And you, did you serve in the National Guard since you got back till now, or is that something that you started a little while after you were back?
No, so initially, when you sign a contract with the U.S. Army, you sign for 8 years, no matter
Hmm.
what. It's just, how do you serve those 8 years? And a lot of people just serve 4 years active and then 4 years inactive reserve, where they're just kind of like on call in case you know, basically, to avoid calling people for a draft. They
Uh-huh.
just call it the inactive reserve.
Yeah.
So, I transferred to the reserve, and then I've been in the Army Reserve, not the National Guard, but the Army Reserve,
Oh, gotcha.
since then. National Guard is, so reserves are federally funded, and the National Guard is a state. It's
Ah,
it's state funded. So
Oh,
That's why
gotcha.
you see Iowa National Guard or Illinois National Guard. You'll see the state listed when they say National Guard.
I see.
Um, yeah,
I understand. And so, when you decided to, pursue the police officer route, now it makes a little bit more sense because I realized that you wanted to do that from the beginning.
yeah,
Um, the time frame in which you switched over to being a police officer, to a lot of people, doesn't make sense. Like obviously, just like you said earlier, we don't have to get too far into the whole political side of it and all that. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole and punish ourselves and other people with it. But you know, uh, last couple of years and right now it's not a popular time to be a police officer. And it doesn't surprise me on one hand because you were never someone that operated off of popularity from the beginning, or,
yeah,
getting pats on the back for every decision you make, like that's something that we never really cared about. In fact, we would generally go the opposite direction, in most
yeah,
cases. Um, but yeah, like that's definitely something that I think surprised a lot of people. And, but I know you in a way that a lot of people don't know you, so like when you told me that you wanted to go the police route, I was so happy. Um, Mostly for the people that you're going to serve every day because I know you as a person. I know that you grew up in that general area. The other reason I was happy for it too is because you train martial arts. You have for a long time. You
mhm,
train jujitsu. So if you get put in a situation where you have to handle yourself or de-escalate a situation, you have a lot of options, a lot of tools to pull from, rather than worst case scenario as your only option, and I also know that you have a lot of, you have like the good for people like in mind, it's not a power thing, it's not an
yeah,
aggression thing, like, and so I was really happy to be like, cool, well, I'm glad my best friend's like out there doing it, and like, I feel like you're the kind of police officer that we want on the streets. You know what I mean? Like you're the kind of police officer that we want influencing new police officers that are coming up to being like, oh, like this is the way that Dan polices. Like this is the way Dan treats people. He doesn't get walked on, but he's not out there trying to cause problems at the same time. We talked about that a little bit the other day on the phone or a couple weeks ago or
yeah.
whatever, briefly. And, um, so I just wanted to talk to you about that briefly, before we wrap up, just to kind of give your opinion on like, the way things are and kind of what your outlook is on your job and, like, just the environment in which people see you, in the world.
Yeah. 2020 was an interesting time for everybody. And that was kind of when I was kicking the idea around wanting to become a police officer
Yeah.
against popular opinion. Um, I think police officers in general don't get enough credit for what they do.
Hmm.
Um, there are some police officers who, by all rights, should not be in that position, or maybe they were good police officers at one point, but they have become jaded and bitter and just don't care. Um, you know, like you said, not to get political or anything, but
Sure.
all the people that I know that wear the uniform who uh, do what I do, um, they they thought the events that occurred in 2020 with up in Minneapolis was pretty gross, pretty disgusting. Um, but also the events following. Um, so in my mind, like you said, I'm not really the type to take the easy route. And when I see an entire profession being criticized, um, I start researching and figuring out like, is this some sort of systemic problem, or is it a culture problem, or is it just the media sensationalizing? And they kind of learn that it's a combination of all of those things. It's not just one thing. It's not racism. It's not politics. It's not just, you know, culture. It's there's so many factors that play into this stuff, and I know personally that you know I feel confident that I can make pretty good decisions,
Hmm.
and that if I got to a point where I felt like anybody could probably replace me as a firefighter.
Hmm.
Not that I wasn't good, but like, and not that it's not hard, but like a lot of people, a lot more people are trying to become firefighters than police officers.
Yeah.
So I felt like not like I had maxed my potential out as a firefighter, but more so that like I would get more personal growth out of being a police officer.
Yeah.
And at the same time, schedule wise, I wasn't going to be gone for 24 hours. I'd be home, overnight with the family. And, I could make a pretty good difference, being an
Yeah. Of
older guy with a lot of life experience, being a
course.
police officer. So
Yeah.
that was my determining, that was all the factors that I used to determine whether or not I wanted to switch from being a firefighter to a police officer. And so I did it. I just, I do what I always do. I pull the trigger. Like I dive in head first to what is the most difficult thing that I can possibly do,
Yeah.
and I'm enjoying it. I like it. I like the
Yeah.
fact that I can. Um, there's a lot of things that I talk to people about that,
Hmm.
I might get a call for something, and I can talk people down from doing stupid things,
Hmm.
um, or someone could be doing something really bad and they're not very friendly to me, or anybody else for that matter. And, they've committed a crime and they deserve to be arrested. And I have no problem being the arresting officer in that case.
Yeah.
If you deserve to go to jail, you deserve to go to jail.
Yeah.
If you're, beating your wife, beating your kids, you know, selling fentanyl to, you know, anybody,
Yeah.
doing stuff like that, not necessarily like, I'm not trying to like make the world better one simple misdemeanor at a time. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
somebody's got a little bit of weed on them, or they're a little bit drunk in public. There are times where, you know, sometimes that could be a problem,
Yeah. Of
but
course.
for the most part, it's, you know, I could use some discretion on,
Yeah.
who I'm going to arrest and why. And
Yeah.
it certainly has nothing to do with race, gender, or religion. That's 100% not the case. It's
Yeah.
uh, who are you hurting? Who are you harming? What have you done? And how are you treating me and other people who are interacting with you? Like, if you've committed a crime, then you're also, you know, just being a terrible person in general. Like, I like the fact that I can, all right, cool. Like, you should be in jail.
Yeah.
And, and then as far as, the investigations goes, there's some really bad people out there that are, there's homicides, there's shootings, there's things like
Yeah.
that, yeah, they're dangerous. And yeah, you get chills a little bit when you're getting ready to go on some sort of dangerous call, but
Yeah.
I'd be stupid if I said I wasn't afraid, but I
Oh, yeah.
also would be lying if I didn't say it excited me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think,
That's why people skydive, that's why people
yeah.
skateboard. That's why people ride bikes. You want to do something a little bit risky. Now that's why people try to squat 1,000 pounds. Like,
Yep.
bro, my knee might just blow out completely, or
Yeah.
my back, or something. But
Yeah.
if you think you can do it, try it.
Totally.
And
And it's one of those things where you got to do what you can while you're here, I mean, It's like you have a limited window, to get some shit done and, make an impact and, have a story, when you're older and, people like us, it's 100% worth it to risk those things in order to, get to that point, you know. Well, yeah, like I told you earlier before we actually started this podcast, I'm planning on having you on the podcast, a number of times in the next, 6 months to a year. So I think we'll probably wrap it up there, but we'll definitely have you back on the podcast and we can get into all other kinds of things. I already have a huge list,
Okay.
in my
Yeah.
brain that we're going to get into. But I really appreciate you spending the time to talk to us about, your life, fighting, the military, firefighting, police work. It's a lot of personal shit. I just appreciate you, telling it like it
Absolutely.
is and, and hanging out. So, but yeah, I'll definitely be in touch and then we'll have to do this again soon.
Oh yeah.
All right. See you, brother.
Have a good one.